Welcome to Interpreters and Interrupters. I'm your host, Maritza, and today I'm accompanied by a very special interpreter friend of mine, Elena. I'll let her introduce herself in a minute. But Elena works as a Spanish in the emergency room at a major hospital. And I've always wanted to know what's it like to be interpreting surrounded by chaos. Thank you, Elena, for being here on the show.
Hi, I'm Elena Cruz, and I'm a senior interpreter at a major hospital. Been working as a Spanish interpreter for about 9 years. I'm very happy to be here on your podcast.
A lot of the people listening to us or watching us on YouTube are new to interpreting. Can you start by talking about caused you to think, oh, I'm going to be an interpreter? And what did you do to become an interpreter?
It was all of a sudden, I wasn't working at all. And I was on Instagram and I saw this friend of mine posting about being a Spanish interpreter for a company called Seracom. I asked him about it and he said he really enjoyed it. I didn't have any training in interpreting. I applied and I got the job. I remember it was about 3 months of training. I used to work at a customer service center, so it was really easy, like the phone part of it. I learned a lot of medical terms. 90% of our calls were medical. It was over the phone. I was very nervous, but my first call was very easy and it was just like I was meant to do it. It felt that way. Like the coach that I was assigned, because there you had coaches who were interpreters already. And so he was like, I have nothing to tell you to make better. It gave me a lot of confidence in order to take more and more calls as we went. And I worked for Seracom for 3 years. At the time, I was getting paid, I think it was $14 or $13 an hour. And I worked the 40-hour week and they were pretty flexible. I was able to put up in a lot of overtime and I was able to work sometimes during the weekend and have a day off during the week. It was a good job. I really enjoyed working there. Even though at the end it was pretty rough because you're in this big call center and it can be quite depressing. We had two suites and more than 50 or more than 75. It was a lot of people next to each other in cubicles. It could be very depressing, not a lot of windows because it was just cubicle after cubicle after cubicle. So at the end, it got very tiring. They had a cafeteria which served like the best wraps I have ever had. And I had like this great pistachio muffin. Loved it. So that made my days better. I think the hardest for me was the commercial calls, like the banking calls. We also did a little bit of legal, and those would always make me very nervous because the judge sounded very strict.
Do you remember that first call?
I don't remember that first call. I do remember one call that had a very big impact on me. It was a very impactful call for me because it reminded me of my past. It was this man who was at a children's hospital on the East Coast. The doctor was telling him about a procedure that they had to do on his child. I just felt like I could relate to what he was saying because he didn't want anything else done to his son. And he told the doctor this. And he was just tired of seeing his son suffer. And the doctor was kind of like pushing towards the procedure, but he was just like, my son is just very young and I don't want to see him suffer anymore. Broke my heart a little bit. And I remember kind of getting out of conduit and kind of like repeating what the doctor said, but saying like more stuff that was like more personal. Um, and the man just didn't change his mind at all. And then we hung up the call. But I remember after that, like I had to take a little break from the phone because it was just too much for me. It was about 5 in the morning. It was like I got there to the center and I was super excited because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to make overtime. And I hadn't had a job where I could make this kind of like overtime. And I was saving up for a trip. So I was super excited. And I sit down and I have my coffee and I have everything. And I'm like, okay, put my headphones on and put myself on the queue, and that first call comes in.
We relate with some calls
Yes.
and what's being said, and it triggers,
Mhm.
it brings up our own experiences.
After 3 years, I started working as an in person. I got tired of the call center and applied at Bentop Hospital in Houston, Texas. I think it's one of my best interpreting experiences that I have ever had. They had about 18 or 20 Spanish interpreters, and they had a clinic, inpatient, and emergency room. And the language service team was in all of that. So they had two interpreters for the clinics, and I think either six interpreters for inpatient, two interpreters for the emergency room. And all other ones were kind of like backups. We had different shifts. So not all 20 worked in the morning. So we had morning, afternoon, and night. And of course, like clinics closes during the night. So they didn't have anybody at night in the clinic. So all other shifts will get inpatient and emergency room services. But mostly the bigger team was in the morning. When I started working there, I didn't have a training. So they just showed me the hospital. They said clinics is here, inpatient is here, the emergency room is there. The schedule, they rotate people. So sometimes every 6 weeks, they will rotate you. So for 6 weeks, you would be in the clinics, and then they'll rotate you to inpatient or they'll rotate you to emergency room. I seriously love that because I wouldn't get tired or burned out from one certain area.
How did you deal with the change of going from over the phone interpreting to in person and being right there with the patient and the provider?
I actually loved it. I didn't have any problem. I always been a person that's like ready for change. I adapt to change really fast. That has made kind of like me adapt to change really quick, and I don't have a problem with it. So I just go with the flow. I'm a person that always goes with the flow, but it wasn't difficult at all.
What's the protocol for interpreting in an emergency room? What are the things that you need to know before you start?
That you will see a lot of things. A lot of things. I guess it depends on the hospital, but where I started working at the emergency room, we were able to see what the doctors would see. There was no curtain. There was no closed doors. There was no behind the curtain type of thing. I saw people dying, blood, vomiting, diarrhea, whatever you call it, wounds, head fractures, um, a lot of different things. So if you are going to the emergency room, you better not be a person that has a queasy stomach or that in the middle of an emergency has to excuse herself. It's for people that are strong with smells, with whatever they see, with their emotion. Yeah.
What tips or tools
Uh-huh.
do you use to avoid having to smell? Because I use vapor rub. I have a
Yeah.
little container of vapor rub and I put it right here because masks don't guard against odor.
I am not a person that is sensible to smells. So to me, it's not like something that I protect against. But I have heard vapor rub or what are those essential oils? People sometimes use essential oils. But for me, it was not nothing. I guess I'm like a 4x4 interpreter.
When you say
Like
4x4, you mean
any
like
terrain.
strong?
Any terrain. Put me anywhere that you want. Like it doesn't really affect me. But yeah. One doctor used to always have a mask. And he would say, yeah, the reason that I wear a mask is because of the smells. So a lot of people wear masks in AED because of that. To start off with, the emergency room is not always emergencies. They have other rooms where maybe the patient has a very severe migraine. They haven't been able to take care of it. Or sometimes there's observation units in the emergency room where like people stay there for 2 days at the most. In Houston, we used to call them shock room. whereas like the patients from the Bay are brought in there. And that's where the real emergencies are happening at. If you're talking about real emergencies, then it depends on the hospital in Houston where I started. We would wait outside the shock room for the patient to come in through the bay and through the hallway and into the room. Then we would go in immediately with all the other doctors. And I would say, I'm going in like this, and the patient is in the middle. And then we would have to go behind the patient where they could hear us, but out of the way from like other people working on the patient, or they're putting an IV, or they're doing vitals, or they're doing physical exams, or cutting the patient's clothes because there's a wound somewhere and they're checking. So it's always where the head of the patient is at. I was in an emergency room. There was a shooting, and the patient got there to the hospital, and immediately they took him to surgery. The son was in the emergency room waiting, and the doctors wanted to speak with him to ask what had happened. And this man got shot, I think, at a store. He went into a store, and then he forgot something in the car, went out, whatever he needed from the car, and went back in. And when he went back in, that's whenever someone was driving by and they shot him multiple times in the back. And his son was right in front of him. The son had blood all over his clothes. He was just very in distress and distraught of what had happened, but calm as well. I believe his dad did make it. We had to talk to the police as well. And at this hospital, we were able to do that. So we were able to interpret for police as well. That's one of the cases that I remember very vividly. I had another patient who fell off a ladder. He was bleeding from somewhere around here. They took him to the shock room, and I was at the head of the patient, or right next to him. The doctors were just checking him, and all of a sudden, the wound in his head starts spurting blood. And I didn't get dirty with it because I moved at that moment. And that's one of the things that when working in an emergency room, you have to be able to move around a lot because you cannot just stay in one spot. And sometimes you'll move around a lot and the doctors are asking questions. That's one tip, is that when you're in the shock room, don't stay in one place. You're going to be moving around a lot. They finished their assessment and everything, and then they took him immediately to surgery to fix that injury in his head. There was this one other time where I assisted the wife of a very famous cumbia singer in Mexico. I didn't know when I was interpreting for her until like later, but she came into the shock room and she was screaming, my baby, I'm pregnant." They were in an Uber, and the Uber was driving really fast, and they had a car accident. I think one of her legs was fractured. A few days later, she got discharged. But she was very grateful for the staff at the hospital because they were really quick in doing whatever they needed to do to save the baby's life and to fix whatever she had injured.
Having to work with patients that are going through crises and you're giving them the bad news or the good news. How do you take care of your mental health?
It's been difficult. I've seen a lot of patients come and go. Now it's more chill where I work at. So I don't really have a problem with like my emotions or with our mental health. But when I used to work at Bentop, I would see patients from the very beginning, them being okay. And then I'll see them, how they would get progressively worse until the point that they will pass away. And that takes a toll on you. The way that I deal with it is that I remember them. I remember the patients that have left, and I take something positive from them because they all, at the very end of their life, they had very wise things to say. And I live for them and I write about them in my journal. And that kind of like makes me appreciate life a lot. Being able to get out there and do more for myself and taking care of my health and It's kind of like living through them and living every day like there's no tomorrow. You just never know.
Anything in particular that a patient has said to you that you have kept in your heart as, "I'll never forget this statement"?
Recently, I went to a family meeting and there was this patient that said that life is very short and something along the lines that love is the only thing that really matters at the end of the day. And I believe that is very true because he had his whole family around him. And I feel like when we leave this earth, like there's nothing better than to be with everybody that you loved. And it's not about the money, it's not about the possessions we have, it's not about any of that. It's being surrounded by the people that we love that makes the transition easier.
What tips do you have for working at an emergency room?
Be quick, very fast paced area. Doctors usually go in, go out, and they're just trying to see if there's something emergent going on most of the time. They just take care of that. That's one of the main things. Be quick. If you're someone that doesn't like smells, then wear a mask and do essential oils or vapor rubs. If you don't like to see things, and if you work at a hospital where like they don't have curtains or you're exposed to everything, then you can always look away. You can always turn towards a wall or look at the clock or look at your notebook if you're taking notes, or you don't have to look at stuff if you don't want to. Me, because I love to look at all of that stuff like blood and I guess all the gross stuff I love. I think in my other life I was a doctor. When I worked at Bentop, I felt like I was part of the medical team and I was in a separate identity. Like I was part of it and I was needed and I was respected. And at other hospitals, I feel like, oh, it's just the interpreter, be with the patient and babysit the patient. And to me, that's kind of like a slap in the face because we have training, a lot of training. We have gone through training. And sometimes in our personal time, we look up words or we also see patients that come and go. And we're part of the team. And that is something that I haven't really seen at hospitals where I live now.
Tell me about your
Mhm.
professional development because you are nationally certified.
I took the NBCMI last year in 2024. And it was because I never thought that I had to take it because I have a lot of experience, but on paper, it looks better. So therefore, I started one of my, I think, the manager from the place where I used to work at, she kind of pushed me to do it. Helen, like, why don't you do the certification? I have been working many years in the field and I thought about it and I started researching and I found ANTA and I took the course, I took the test, and then I decided to get the certification.
What was
And
test day
then
like? Test day, because it seems that there's always something going on test day that just trips you up.
I think mine was setting up. I had to download some type of Proctor. I think it's called Proctor.
Mhm.
And then it was just the internet, the problem, but I got to figure it out. And then it just went smoothly from there. I remember that I think the difficult part for me was the simultaneous part of it.
There are so many tools out there that you can use to practice your interpreting. So I encourage everyone that's listening or watching to take advantage of those tools available. Any tips on people that would like to be a medical interpreter on how they can become a medical interpreter and grow up to be a senior interpreter like yourself?
It helped me a lot being in a company where I was trained to become an interpreter. And I think the first step to being an interpreter is being a phone interpreter. It gives you a lot of skills that being a in-person interpreter won't give you. It gives you that structure. It makes you be able to be not in person because sometimes that is nerve-wracking and sometimes you're just in a moment. But in the phone, you have that ability to look up words, ask for time if you don't understand something and look it up. So being a phone interpreter for me was vital to my growth. Then you're able to all of this vocabulary that sometimes in person, there's no time to kind of like learn as you go because it's very exhausting than being over the phone. It's very exhausting because you have to be around people 24/7. And that's your coworkers, the patients, providers, like you're always with someone. And so when you're over the phone, you don't have to deal with coworkers. You don't have to deal with like being surrounded by people all the time. And so you have a little bit more energy to be able to focus on your growth. As Maritza said, there's always tools out there. Like there's YouTube. I used to do YouTube and become very, very good at note taking because maybe in the emergency room, you don't need them because it's very fast paced and very short sentences. However, though, when you're doing family meetings, I myself still write notes when I'm in family meeting. Um, and it's very, very helpful. So being able to take notes, it's a vital thing as an interpreter as well.
And I'll place the link to the episode on note taking in the description so that you guys could check it out. I'm sure that I could interpret without taking any notes, but I don't want to. I want to make
Mhm.
sure that I have what I need to do a complete interpretation. So I've made my own symbols. It's great when you make your own
Mhm.
symbols and you're not learning somebody else's that may not mean anything to you. That's a great tip,
Mhm.
Elena. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on this episode. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest. Thank you.